Welcome to the NFC North edition of the Offseason Stock Report. It's nice to have moved on from the horrible sadness of the NFC South to a division that knows how to win more football games than it loses. We start with the division champion, hailing from a city with their nasty-ass hot dog that carries the city's name, Chicago. Fellas, things are finally looking up. A punching bag for far too long, but no longer. Ben Johnson has arrived as the savior that you so desperately needed, and he has risen your quarterback from the early bust allegations. Caleb Williams is undoubtedly the guy, even though he'll get shit from a wide group of people not relating to his play whatsoever. You know, because he can be a little dainty sometimes. Performative or not, Bears fans can rest easy knowing he could sling the hell out of the rock. You guys came so unbelievably close to an NFC title game. The throw Khalib made in the dying seconds of the divisional game should have been the beginning of a Cinderella run to a Super Bowl. That play should have lived in infamy until the end of time, but the loser gets forgotten, and honestly it's a shame, because that was one of the most miraculous throws I've ever seen. While there are some absolute juggernauts in the NFC these days, the Bears firmly exist in the contender tier of the conference. But there are some aspects of their game that they really need to improve on in order to stay there. They went 11-6 in a good division, which is awesome. But the biggest question mark for me revolves around sustainability. The Bears won 7 games last year where they trailed in the last 2 minutes, which is a wild achievement on its own, but it's impossible to replicate. As fans, we constantly hear the regurgitated line, "Football is a 3-phase game." And while it's partially coach speak nonsense, it's also kind of true. The Bears didn't have at least one phase show up until the fourth quarter almost every week. But it's not a mystery as to which phase was usually at fault. The offense could move the ball. They had no issue scoring. The defense, on the other hand, bad. 4th most in yards per game surrendered, on par with Dallas and Cincy, who had notoriously ass defenses. The sack and pressure numbers they were able to generate were actually pitiful. Honestly, it's just a complete failure at the point of attack. They were at the bottom of rushing defense, surrendering 5 yards per carry. The secondary wasn't much better, but they were made to look a lot worse by not having a pass rush in front of them. So I think we can all tell what the obvious path for improvement would be going into the offseason. For those who don't know already, this defense thrived on taking the ball away. It was the only redeeming factor about a group that tended to be an absolute liability. But unfortunately for the Bears, they lost their top 4 picker offers in the form of Kevin Byard, Nashawn Wright, Tremaine Edmonds, and CJ Gardner-Johnson. Before we go any further, this will be the last you hear of CJ Gardner-Johnson. Losing him is probably a positive. On the other hand, the other 3 guys are going to hurt. Starting with Byard, he was an excellent safety last season. Not just normal good, but all-pro first team good. Losing an all-pro first teamer is just brutal for anyone. The void created by a guy that was the literal best at his position will be felt no matter what you do. Byard was the catalyst for the takeaways the defense needed to survive. Now they're in a place where finding 7 interceptions from his replacement just won't happen. But it's worth noting that Byard is firmly in the UNC status at this point, and he will turn 33 before he takes another snap in the NFL. I think things get a bit ugly when you realize he signed a 1-year, $7 million deal in New England. When you consider his production, the contract is dirt cheap, and obviously there's no downside of a long-term commitment from the Patriots side of things. I honestly just don't think the Bears should have pivoted to youth here. Byard just showed you what he's capable of, and if a 1-year deal would have gotten it done, he needs to be retained. Then we have Nashawn Wright, who on the surface isn't a lockdown corner per se, but he was responsible for 5 interceptions last year, and some of them were highlight reel material. His ability to play at an above-average level while giving the bonus of takeaways shouldn't be underestimated. In a similar theme to the Byard situation, Wright only got $3.5 million. Why not just throw a little bit of cheese his way to keep that production in the building? Then there's Tremaine Edmonds, who gets the rep of being better than he actually is. Even though he grabbed 4 picks of his own last year, he wasn't great in coverage. He may still be a solid run defender, but overall I think his name does heavier lifting than his actual play on the field. But his contract situation is the exact antithesis to the previous 2 players. Edmonds got a fat $12 million AAV from the Giants. The NFL is weird, man. Sometimes money just gets thrown at stopgaps that make no sense whatsoever. Nevertheless, I think letting him walk is fine with Chicago, because fuck paying that contract. Some other players that left this offseason that played a significant role last year are Jaquan Brisker and DJ Moore. Brisker is kind of poop from a butt, so not much loss there. He played 99% of the snaps. Not very well, so that's a welcomed loss. Then there's DJ Moore, a product of the trade with the dumbass Panthers that landed them Caleb Williams, has been shipped off for a 2nd-round pick. And before you say that's poor compensation, let me argue that I think his perceived value also is based off of name value. His play slipped pretty hard last year, Even with the offense taking a massive step, his production tanked compared to his first 2 years in Chicago. My theory is that he was likely getting phased out of the offense a little bit to create a bigger role for Luther Burden. And to make that second round pick they got in return for him look even better, let me tell you the contract DJ got. 27.5 per year for 4 years. Absolutely not. Goodbye, good riddance, best of luck in Buffalo. It's inconceivable to me to give that kind of money to a wide receiver 2 who isn't even close to the best wide receiver 2 in the league. Pass. In case you didn't catch where I fall in this trade, that's a W for the Bears for sure. Finally, we rounded out with a shock retirement. Drew Dahlman, coming off a Pro Bowl season at only 27 years old, has decided to hang him up. Losing a top 10 center out of absolutely nowhere blows. Dahlman was a big part of why Ryan Poles was finally able to provide protection for a quarterback, and he was the anchor on a legitimately elite run blocking unit. It only takes one bum to fuck up an offensive line, and finding someone to replace this dude isn't a patch job. So, with some pretty notable losses, they had to do a lot to try to replace a big snap share from last year. The notable additions list is shorter, but I actually think it's pretty solid. Starting with the headliner, Kobe Bryant. I'm likely lower on Kobe Bean than most. He gets the Super Bowl hype tax and the Bears were willing to pay it. The big stat that gets thrown around for Bryant is his passer rating allowed, and while it was very good, I consider his coverage to be more average as opposed to elite. In a season where he played on a defense that had a pass rush that was getting home constantly, the role of a safety became significantly easier. Thus, he can be quite propped up by what the guys in front of him are doing. Even with that being the case, I don't necessarily think that he was as consistent as he should have been considering the unit he played with. For my money, Byard is miles better. He was a first-team All-Pro on a defense that had no pass rush whatsoever. Even with him being on the wrong side of 30, give me Byard 10 times out of 10. The contract is just a bit too gnarly for me. Combined with what I think his actual talent is, I think they'll have regression at the position in 2026. The other big move is Devin Bush. From seemingly a first-round bust to a top linebacker in the league last year, Bush had a crazy season picking up 125 tackles, 3 picks, and a couple of sacks. Beyond just the box score stats, he was excellent. Top tier against the run and in coverage last year. He thoroughly outplayed the guy he is coming in to replace and only costed the Bears slightly more. I love this move for them. As long as he doesn't regress to his Steelers form, I think the Bears will be happy they chose to pay out this contract instead of Edmonds. When it comes to the draft, the Bears took some really chalk picks. Everything they did seemed to fill a void that the offseason had created for them. But in my opinion, they were able to do an awesome job of it. I'm a certified hater of the need-based pick. I detest trying to just fill voids on a depth chart. But I think the Bears pulled off a rare feat of picking for need and somehow also getting the best player available. Starting their draft class with Thieneman at 25 amazed me. I honestly thought there was no chance in hell that he would tumble that far. He would have easily been the top safety in most drafts. He was just unlucky enough to be overshadowed by a generational prospect at the position in Caleb Downs. There was obviously a lot of change in the Bears secondary, and this pick is just a match made in heaven. A 2-time All-American that tore it up at the Combine, with the tape to match his athletic profile, is exactly what Chicago needed. In the second, they once again did the obvious thing by picking Logan Jones out of Iowa. Without looking, guess what position a guy named Logan Jones that went to Iowa plays? Yep, it's offensive line. Specifically center. The Bears had to address the Dahlman retirement, and I always kind of figured it would be in the second. The position rarely brings a first-round pick, but the NFL goes crazy for the top guys after night 1. With the terrifying vacancy that they had to deal with, grabbing the 2025 Remington winner and a unanimous All-American is about as good as you can possibly do. Overall, the Bears were able to lose a lot and gain a lot this offseason. Everything they did that I didn't like seemed to be countered by a move that I did like. For example, I gave them a minus for losing Byard, and Bryant didn't make up for it, but once you add Thieneman to the equation, I think they ended up better off. While they didn't necessarily replace DJ Moore, I think his contract was so ass that I gave him a plus for trading him. With that being said, I'm going to give the Bears a stock up for the offseason. Bad on.
I kind of enjoyed beating Matt LaFleur twice a year.
Ah yes, the Cheese team. The same team that ran roughshod over the NFC North for most of my life. It feels to me that their reign is finally coming to an end after what happened to them last season. The Packers went all in for Micah Parsons, making them look incredible on paper. Then they proceeded to walk through the majority of the season, winning and looking like they were on their way to the NFC title game at a minimum. Then Parsons blew out his ACL and things started to spiral, losing 5 in a row down the stretch, including an embarrassing collapse in the wildcard round to a Bears team they have been stuffing in the proverbial locker for 2 decades now. The Packers have this weird ability granted to blue blood franchises that makes people think everything they touch turns to gold, when in reality, they've just been extremely lucky to stumble upon 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks back-to-back. So Jordan Love got the treatment that he was just going to be a lock to continue the tradition. This video isn't about assessing quarterbacks, so I won't get further into what I think about Jordan Love, but what I will go into is whose fault it was for the 2025 meltdown. You might be surprised to hear this, but I think it's Matt LaFleur. He's widely considered to be in the upper echelon of coaches, sometimes even in the McVay-Shanahan tier, and I couldn't disagree with it more. The obvious counter by Packers fans will be, "Oh, well, we make the playoffs every year." Sure, but you've been the 7th seed in the last 3 seasons. Had that shit not been added in 2020, you would have missed the playoffs every year since 2021. The Packers haven't won the division since Jordan Love took over from Rodgers. LaFleur established a long leash for his coaching ability because he took over with a legend at the helm to make him look really good for a few years. Now, with each year that passes, everyone gets to see him get further and further from what everyone thought he once was. As much as NFL teams love firing the shit out of coaches, they won't do it unless the team completely bottoms out. So, Monsieur LaFleur will likely be around a lot longer than he should. Because in what world does he deserve a multi-year extension despite that disaster at the end of the season? Enough of the year in review stuff, because we're here to talk about the offseason. So let's knock out the additions first. When doing research for each team, there are typically a lot of different signings to assess. Then, I narrow them down in terms of impact to a few worth covering. When looking at the Packers offseason signings, I saw so few names on the first few websites that I thought something hadn't been updated yet. But to my surprise, they all had. The Packers made a measly 4 signings from other teams and traded for 1 guy. That's it. 5 players. I genuinely couldn't believe it. So, let's talk about those that were brought in from the outside. There's only 2 worth even commenting on. And spoiler alert, they aren't very exciting. First is Javon Hargrave. After lasting only a single season in Minnesota before getting cut, you'd likely think things are pretty concerning. But it's been pretty widely covered that it was more of a cap thing than a quality of play thing. But the Vikings have issues at interior defensive line. So I think had he been good enough, they would have found a way to keep him around. Regardless, he is now in Green Bay to fill the exact same desperate need. What is there to really say here? He's 33. The good years are gone. He wasn't very good last year. He was only able to get on the field for 50% of the snaps because he was such a liability in the run game. Packers fans will likely try to sell this signing as some sort of a big deal, but he's just a situational guy at this point. It's more likely than not that he just gets cut again next offseason. Their second biggest signing was Zaire Franklin. Let me be real for a second. Before doing research, I saw this signing and thought, oh, okay, that's pretty good. Then about 3 minutes later, I audibly said, oh fuck, when looking into his 2025 season. I can't sugarcoat this any more than what I'm about to say, but this dude was fucking horrible in 2025. So much so that I was genuinely shocked. And I'm just now realizing that his gaudy tackle numbers over the last few seasons have been nothing more than stat padding. And his 2024 All-Pro second team selection just seems egregious now. The tackle numbers did just enough to obscure how awful he is in coverage. Like, full-blown liability. But the Packers traded for him anyways. Believe it or not, this is the extent of the additions, because I will not sit here and decide who of Sky Moore, Benjamin St-Juste, and Tyrod Taylor is most important. A quick note before moving on, I have to talk about something. The Christian Watson contract is fucking hysterical. Nearly $28 million a year for a slightly better Allen Lazard that gets injured a lot. Good work, Packers, watching the old wallet and free agency so they can make Christian Watson a very rich man. Alright everyone, so let's check out who they lost. I can say with confidence, this list of players is bigger than 5. And it's mostly filled with players that we've been told are good, but are actually just kind of butt. The king amongst them is Rashawn Gary. The Packers traded him to Dallas for a 4th just to save a few bucks. Green Bay gave Gary a big contract a few years back, and since then, he's just gotten worse every year. Assessing him can be a bit tough though, because if you believe in pressures and sacks as the biggest indicator for success, then he looks pretty okay. But when you look at metrics like pass rush win rate, he looks awful. You can cherry pick stats on this guy all day to paint whatever narrative you'd like, but to me, he's just painfully mid. While I do place him in the average tier of things, I think it's better to have him on your roster than a singular 4th round pick. But shedding his cap is probably pretty beneficial in the long run. Keeping with the theme of, oh, he's a Packer first rounder, so he's pretty good, is Quay Walker. In a similar vein to new Packer Zaire Franklin, Quay Walker has been propped up by high tackle totals and has distorted his true talent. Linebacker isn't purely about getting tackles. And once you look beyond the surface, Walker exists in the same tier of poop shit that Franklin does. Last year he was pretty awful in both the run and in coverage. But don't worry, he got his 128 tackles to make things look good. More than just playing bad, his presence has likely hampered the development of Edgerrin Cooper by making him play a role to try and mitigate Walker's flaws. This departure is a classic case of addition by subtraction. Now, we move on to Mr. Double Guardian Cap himself, Romeo Doubs. Yes, I said Doubs. There's no way that name is pronounced Dobbs. There was something beautiful about watching that man run around in a XXL yellow hat. Once again, here we are with another player that's considered good by some, but really isn't at all. Doubs is the epitome of an average receiver. He spent 4 years on a team filled with wide receiver threes, probably thinking he was the number one guy. He's fine, I guess, but he got $17 million per year, and I have to say good for the Packers for not giving it to him. But they gave even more to Christian Watson, which might be even worse. Now we're going to round things off with maybe one of the strangest and most outrageous free agent contracts I've ever seen. Malik Willis has thrown a total of 155 passes in his NFL career. And for some ungodly reason, the Dolphins gave him 67.5 over 3 seasons. This is ludicrous, man. Miami is fiending for a quarterback so bad that they just throw money at someone who's essentially never played. Shit, Miami, I'll play quarterback for you for 1/1000th of that. Just to flip the script on you a little bit here, despite not knowing what the hell he will become from here on out, I wouldn't be surprised if he's more consistent than Jordan Love. Sure, it might be consistently trash, but it'll be consistent. As is tradition, we assess the draft last. Their class was boring. They drafted a bunch of guys with absolutely no juice. Unless you're a big draft head that has a my guys list every April, you'll likely not know what the NFL projection is for any of the guys they drafted. Especially considering they didn't have a first and no picks within the top 50. Even though I don't have an opinion on the players themselves, I do have a prediction. All of these guys will fall somewhere between okay and horrific. The Packers GM Brian Gutekunst is somehow in year 9 despite not drafting a Pro Bowler in the last 6 seasons. Probably better to ship off the picks with this guy in charge. Micah Parsons with no ACL gives you more value than whatever he'll pick in April. The summary of the Packers offseason is defined by them essentially sitting on their hands during free agency and letting a lot of middle-of-the-road guys go. Then subsequently drafting players that no one's really excited about at all. Though I didn't highlight all of them, I just hate most of the contracts that they gave out. They were pretty stingy this offseason, so they could give way too much money to guys that aren't nearly good enough to command the dollar figure they got. With that, I'm giving a big stock down on the Packers.
But you can, it was just this built-up anger that was kind of ready to just explode.
Welcome to Minnesota, the franchise that could have Sam Darnold at quarterback, or even Daniel Jones if that tickles your fancy, but instead have the option of Teen Wolf or the Rugrat. 9-8 last season, led by a good defense and hampered by a pitiful offense. They headed into the offseason with no apparent answer to their main issue, quarterback. Obviously, Kyler Murray is much better than 9, so he will likely start for them next season. But does that get you much better than 9 wins? The entire situation doesn't really inspire confidence, especially considering all the what could have beens that have walked out of the door the last few years. They exist in sort of football purgatory at this point. They are nowhere near bad enough to truly bottom out and get an answer at quarterback via the draft, and they aren't good enough to ascend. Barring a miracle, there's no real path in the short term for them to win their division. They are beyond lucky to keep Brian Flores around for another year, but ultimately that'll only bring them a bunch of 13 to 10 games next season. Let's be honest here. What's the truly best case scenario? Kyler Murray starts 17 games for them, they win 10, grab a wild card spot, but get bounced in the first round. But the consequence of that best case scenario is something they're all too familiar with at this point. Murray would likely get a huge contract offer from a bottom feeder, and they'd end up in the same position as when they let Darnold walk. Though it might all end up being in vain, they still had to do the offseason stuff. Unfortunately for the Vikings, every move that involved big money or a big name involved a guy walking out the door. Their biggest move came on day 2 of the draft when they shipped off Jonathan Grenard to Philly for 2/3. This one caught me by surprise, because as I'll go on to cover, Minnesota did a ton of cap-saving moves, so it didn't seem likely that their best edge rusher would end up being a cap casualty as well. The box score stats weren't kind to Grenard in 2025, so it may look like his contract from Philly is a bit insane, but his pass rush win rate and pressure totals better match the money he's going to make. The return the Vikings got for him was modest, but Philadelphia gave him a pretty huge deal to make him a top 10 paid edge rusher. While I was complimentary of his advanced metrics, the contract is a bit excessive for me. It makes sense that the Vikings were unable to give him this kind of deal, but as we all know by now, the Eagles can just create void years into oblivion to keep improving their team and manipulate the cap more than anyone. But honestly, I don't foresee Grenard getting back to his Pro Bowl, All-Pro team form of 2024. But regardless, the loss will still hurt the Vikings in the long run, but I don't think it's backbreaking. The exotic shit that Flores is famous for creates enough carnage that they should be able to find a solid enough replacement. While potentially not to the same degree as a standalone pass rusher, it won't really matter because the Vikings aren't known for getting home with 4 in a conventional way. The second biggest departure that honestly isn't big at all would be Jalen Nailor. A guy that's nothing more than a wide receiver 3 goes for big money to the Raiders. It's a classic at this point. A shitty team throwing money to fill out their roster with guys that are subpar. I don't know, man. He's just not that good. His contract is crazy, and he's had essentially no production in the league. If you're the Vikings or a Vikings fan, do you really give a shit about this one? You have Jettas and Addison. It doesn't really matter if you have a wide receiver 3 at this point. Typically, replacing 400 yards of production is easy, but with the inability to operate a passing offense with the quarterbacks they have, might make this exponentially harder. Time will tell, but with their wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2, it should be enough. Javon Hargrave also left town as we covered in the Packers section. The Vikings had a desperate need for interior D-line going into the 2025 season. They opted for the veteran solution of Hargrave and Jonathan Allen, and it didn't work. They cut both of them after 1 season.
I tried to do a strategy, and then I tried to do that strategy, and it didn't work.
The thought process on bringing Hargrave in was solid, but he's old, and it was only going to be temporary. When you consider the deal they had him on, he was always going to get the axe this offseason. He only got about 50% of the snaps last season as a part of an elderly interior group. He was pretty bad as a run defender last year, but still provided value as a pass rusher. While he still provides some upside, it's bad business to keep a 33-year-old purely rotational defensive lineman that's taking up $15 million per year on a team strapped for cap space. To round out the departures, we move on to a retirement. Ryan Kelly called it quits after 10 seasons, but only 1 in Minnesota. After finally accepting defeat on the Garrett Bradbury experience, the Vikings went hard for Ryan Kelly to finally bring consistent center play. And honestly, it worked. On a per-snap basis, he was easily a top 10 center. But it was short-lived. Kelly started 8 games and racked up injuries that were just a bummer. Week 2, concussion. Week 4, concussion. Week 16 with a guardian cap, concussion. His 1 year here seemed to bring him to the decision of fuck this whole football thing. 6 recorded concussions, 3 in 1 season. You gotta feel for the guy. But for the Vikings, he was a welcomed solution for a long-standing problem. But this is the NFL we're talking about, and now they're back to the drawing board. When it pertains to additions, an offseason of playing the "we ain't got no money" game is always going to be pretty miserable. But the Vikings did make one big signing in Juwan Jennings. Going into the offseason, the rumor was that Jennings was going to get an ungodly contract from someone, and I was chomping at the bit to be critical of whoever was the one to do it. Ultimately, things didn't play out the way people thought they would. He sat on the open market for a while after free agency started. Typically, the top guys are grabbed pretty early during the legal tampering period. With Juwan being considered amongst the top tier of free agents, there had to be a reason that he was still sitting there. Apparently, going back to the previous year, the 49ers had offered him a multi-year deal, worth roughly $17 per season. But Jennings decided to bet on himself, and he fucking lost. Really bad. Getting only $8 million per season from Minnesota. That's fucking brutal, man. But it is a bit arrogant to walk away from a large deal and go on to ask for 20 to 25 per year despite having a season with only 600 yards. This wasn't your normal 600 yards. This was on a team that was desperate for healthy receivers. He should have been the feature guy putting up eye-watering numbers in a Shanahan scheme with nobody there to take up any targets. I'm all for guys betting on their talent, but we gotta be realistic here. A little too much pride has left him with less than half of what he could have had. And now he has to try to put up numbers with a much worse quarterback situation. I imagine he's kind of pissed off and betting on himself again, but you have to imagine that huge deal will never come now. But this is about the Vikings, not a pity party for Juwan Jennings. This deal is awesome for the team. $8 million for a guy that'll come in and be the wide receiver 3 that is an elite blocker and is a good big body target. Considering the talent of the guys that come ahead of him on the depth chart, I'm sure things will be really easy for Jennings in Minnesota. Most importantly, this is a massive upgrade from Nailor in terms of play and financially. At a glance, it seems like this was the one and only guy to give a shit about in terms of signings. But I have another one. I present to you James Pierre. Anyone outside of Pittsburgh might be saying, who the fuck is that? I don't blame you, and I'm only talking about him because there's quite an interesting grade associated with him. If you aren't into PFF grades, that's fine. I get it. But just hear me out here. James Pierre somehow was graded as the #1 coverage cornerback according to PFF last season. Pretty crazy, right? The humongous caveat here is that he only played 32% of the defensive snaps, which is obviously really low for a corner. Throwing up a crazy coverage grade for the first time at 29 years old is kind of odd, but to roll the dice on a guy that graded out that well for only $8.5 million over 2 years is a pretty easy decision for a team that needs corner depth badly. Pierre could end up just being a flash in the pan, but I think it's a good signing, and even if he sucks, it really won't have any financial implications. Now, when it comes to the draft, the Vikings went into it without a GM, and on night one, you could really tell. For me, the Vikings had the biggest reach of the entire first round. You had the 18th pick and you go for Caleb Banks, all because the Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave thing didn't work out for you. I hate this pick. It genuinely could not have been more need-based. You cashed in a premium pick on a player that had no right to be picked at this spot, because every resource they threw at defensive tackle hasn't worked. This isn't an indictment against Caleb Banks. It's an indictment against the head dipshits of this operation. The entire NFL knew that Minnesota was just busting to pick an interior D lineman. But considering the class, I figured it would be in the second at the earliest. Banks had decent at best production during his 5 years in college, so he's already not a very good player, but he also has a horrific medical record. Just as a quick review, 2024 he had foot surgery. 2025 he had an injury in which his foot fully snapped. And yes, foot surgery. 2026 he had foot surgery after an injury at the combine. I'm not a doctor, but reoccurring foot injuries on a guy that has to stay over 300 pounds isn't great. I just know, because they didn't have a GM, whoever was heading this operation heard of RAS scores, saw that Banks scored well, saw his position, and sent in the pick. At what point did teams stop picking bullshit players because of combine scores and perceived high ceilings? You know what often comes with a high ceiling? A floor that's low as hell. It just doesn't make sense to essentially light a first round pick on fire. As for the rest of the class, I'll be brief. I like the Jake Golday pick. I think he pairs pretty well with the Brian Flores scheme. The Dominique Big Citrus Orange pick in the third is cool, I guess. But they doubled down on defensive tackle. Again. And I just know for a fact that it was to fill out the depth chart. Doing this will always just purely be horseshit decision making to me. They could have gotten an actual good player in the first and rocked with Big Citrus in the third. Instead, they decide double dipping is the way to fix their problem. If they both suck, then what? They go back to the veteran market? It just feels like the beginning of a never-ending cycle. For this reason, I'm really low on their draft class. When I look back on their offseason, I guess there's really nothing else they could have done to make the outlook on next season look better than it was last year. 9-8 really might be the ceiling for the time being. The only way they can overperform is if Kyler plays like first overall pick Kyler. But if 9 ends up playing, the whole operation is cooked. With that being said, stock down. They sit at the bottom of this division going forward, looking a long way up at the competition.
Dan Campbell, not surprised. He's got big onions. I mean, this is
the story that most people came to love a few years ago. The Lions finally removed themselves from the Browns tier of the NFL and got good seemingly overnight. Saved by the knee-biting head coach and Jared Goff, sane NFL fans got behind the lovable losers. Last year, they came into the season coming off a 15-2 year. They had Super Bowl hype, but one question loomed extremely large. What would happen without Ben Johnson leading the offense? Honestly, it was better than I thought. The offense still ripped pretty hard, 5th in yards and 4th in points. And as you do after offensive output like that, they fired their offensive coordinator. It must have been his fault that the injury report looked like the defense was storming Normandy on a weekly basis. Starting traffic cones in the secondary and finishing with 9 wins? It's not so bad. A bit of bias here. If this team was remotely healthy, they probably would have won this division. I mean, they finished 3rd in the NFC in point differential. I just think they got wildly unlucky. It could have been better and should have been better for Detroit. Then once the season ended, there was rumblings of potential doom for Dan Campbell. The guy completely installed a winning culture for the first time, maybe ever. But it only took about 5 minutes for Lions fans to become entitled. There was a time they would have prayed for 9 wins. For God's sake, do you remember what Rod Marinelli was like? This Lions team out of absolutely nowhere had a Super Bowl window descend directly from heaven. But unfortunately, it appears that it is slammed shut. A theme that has persisted with this team is the loss of talent. And the offseason this year brought even more. Since the Lions evolved into a real football team, they've depended on their offensive line more than any other position. In the last 2 years, the offseason has not been kind to this group. In 2025, it was the retirement of Frank Ragnow, who is just impossible to replace. While he was an amazing player, it's just one guy. You can try to survive. But 2026 has brought more of the same. Taylor Decker got a fun surprise when the Lions asked him to take a pay cut, and he said no thanks, so they released him. It's pretty shitty that after 10 years, he was given a 24-hour period to make a decision about said pay cut, which obviously didn't go so well, and that was the end of their relationship. But the losses don't stop with Decker. Graham Glasgow was also released. Another 10-year guy on this offensive line also gone. While Decker and Glasgow had taken a step back last year, you can't underestimate the value of consistency on an offensive line. Decker, Glasgow, Ragnow, and Sewell had a shit ton of reps together. Now, only one of them remains. Replacing offensive linemen is a miserable endeavor, and it's more likely than not that the new guy will be subpar, if not completely garbage. Teams will always look to get younger and pay guys less. I get it, it's business. But cutting guys that can communicate protections without actually talking is a big deal, and I think they might just be fucked in the department that made them so lethal. The only known commodity that they brought in to address the holes on the offensive line is Cade Mays from Carolina. And he comes not cheap, nor is he very good. To me, it doesn't move the needle at all in accomplishing what they set out to do. You've got to be a little worried about what all this means for Jahmyr Gibbs. Since running backs are mostly the product of their offensive line, I don't think it's going to be shocking if he's not flirting with 2K all-purpose next year. The O-line wasn't the only place they had a high rate of turnover. Alex Anzalone signed with Tampa, and I'm not sure what Lions fans think of him, but to me he was kind of everywhere when I watched Detroit. I found that he was always making some sort of an impact, especially in the coverage department, where it currently is a disaster for them. Anzalone was an excellent linebacker to pair with Jack Campbell, who is ascended to be one of the best in the entire league, but the salary cap loves to destroy good things. The interior defensive line took a hit as well, with DJ Reader and Roy Lopez packing their bags. Both guys were solid last season, and with all the interior needy teams in the NFL, it was obvious they were going to get lured away and overpaid. Of the two, I'd say Reader likely hurts worse. He's been an excellent asset in the run game for his entire career. It's often said that the lines of scrimmage are the most important position groups in football, so I don't love the fact that the Lions went ahead and neglected both of them this offseason. The pain of that doesn't stop here. The Lions also let Al-Quadin Muhammad walk. Coming off an 11-sack season, he signed a deal with Tampa for peanuts. And let me tell you, the edge depth on the Lions is literally zero. All it would have taken was $4 million to retain a 10-plus sack guy. Some other guys listed here got some really gaudy contracts, but this was cheap. With essentially nobody coming off the edge opposite Hutch, this should have been a priority. I feel like this defense might actually be fucked next year. Their coverage ability is bad, and they're always hurt. And now they're an Aiden Hutchinson injury away from giving quarterbacks 5 business days to throw the ball. And a bit of good news, Amik Robertson got signed by the Washington football team for $7.5 per year somehow. I guess they missed the fact that he was god-awful last year. Addition by subtraction, Lions fans. The additions list is going to be really short. They kind of got nobody. I feel like I need to highlight at least one signing, so I'll choose the funniest one. Isaiah Pacheco. Gone are the days of Sonic and Knuckles. Oh shit, I forgot to tell you. Detroit lost David Montgomery too. Nevertheless, in are the days of Sonic and... the meanest running you've ever seen for 1.9 yards per carry. Detroit, you're gonna love this guy. The draft class is just a case study in drafting solely based on need to fill gaps on the roster. Blake Miller in the first was purely out of necessity. He was the top-rated tackle on the board at 17, and I'm sure they didn't hesitate to take him. The next 3 picks were all big needs, in edge, backer, and corner. They had to try to replace some of those 65 overall bronze players spread throughout this defense. Brad Holmes' first 3 draft classes were bangers. They've been kind of underwhelming since. And if this one falls into that same category, the outlook for Detroit starts to look more and more like the 2010s. I'll admit, I have a soft spot for the Lions, so it pains me to say that I think this operation might be going downhill at this point. For me, this offseason has been a firm stock down. If the offensive line crashes and burns, I think Jared Goff regresses to the mean. The defense has already been hamstrung for years, and more guys keep walking out the door. Having to prioritize huge paydays for a core group of guys has been a bit paralyzing for the Lions. If the draft picks don't start to hit, they're going to be in rebuild mode much sooner than they had hoped. The outlook of the NFC North is a bit odd to me. Detroit, Minnesota, and Green Bay seem to be teetering on the edge of disaster, while simultaneously they all seem able to make a deep run if they figure a few things out. The whole division finishing above 500 doesn't seem like a fluke to me, but I wouldn't be surprised to see 1 or 2 of them bottom out next year. Like I said, things are strange in this division, and its pecking order seems to be completely up in the air at this point. If you're a fan of any of these teams, I'm interested to hear your take on my perception of your division. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.